Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Crossroads, and I'd like to welcome my guest panelist. Welcome, Alan Moran.
Hi, Annie.
No
Good to talk
worries.
to you again.
And pleased to have you too, Alan. Always pleased to have you because I noted that you'd written recently a front page article about fiscal policy on the Australian, and I appreciate you coming to our forum. Now, I'm going to just cut across here to just go through a couple of newspaper front pages and then we'll open the floor for discussion. So the first is the Australian, and I noted in the Australian front page that there was about 9 articles about the coronavirus and one about the American primary election. And the same sort of ratio is here for the BBC. All of these are about coronavirus except for Joe Biden there. And I wanted to place the thinking housewife. I'm just going to make a reference to that. I won't bring the article up, but I will make a reference because I just happened to speak to someone yesterday who wrote an article for that website about this. This is the ABC talking about the fact that India, 1,000 million people, and so densely populated, in some of the slums, there's 1 million people living in a square mile. And there is India, and it doesn't seem to be suffering from the coronavirus. There are some outbreaks, but the mortality rate is slight in comparison to the concern that's being raised by our papers. And this again is the same. The number of cases is 114 for India, but nothing about the mortality rate. And I think that that's very interesting because there was an article in the Australian. It's the fatalities that count, not the numbers infected. I don't have access to those articles because I'm not a paying subscriber to the Australian, but I think that the issue is important. Is it infection rate or is it fatalities? And is it a 9 out of 10 articles are about the coronavirus while we're watching the economy lunch itself? The economy is collapsing, and 9 out of 10 articles are about the coronavirus. Is that the only thing that's going on at the moment? Your thoughts, Alan Moran?
Well, I think it pretty well is. The you see worst case scenarios with the virus, and I agree with you. It's not the infection, but it's death that's the important thing.
Hmm.
But worst case scenarios are at the present time. If you look at the number who have contracted the disease and the number who have died,
Hmm.
you've actually got something like an 8% death rate right now.
Hmm.
Now, if you sort of look at again this worst case scenario where somebody, Angela Merkel, by no means an alarmist, is saying, presumably on very good advice,
Yep.
that 60% of us in the world will get this virus eventually. Then, if you number that 60% by the 7 billion people, whatever, in the world, you're talking 200 or 300 million people will die. Now, that's the worst case scenario. You look at some other cases
Hmm.
where, and certainly, say, outside of Wuhan in China and in South Korea, which has been very aggressive in addressing the virus, the death rate is much lower. It's well below 1% in both those cases.
Hmm.
So, the issue before us is unless we do things drastic, we are facing a sort of death rate which we've only ever seen anything like it during warfare. So it is it's quite justifiable that everybody is concerned. The government's concerned. It's not a beat up. Eventually, of course, we will become immune to it as we've become immune to cholera and various other forms of flu, and it will just be a background. But for the next few months, and even perhaps as long as a year, we are going to see sharply curtailed activity. We're all presumably all taking efforts to minimize social contact. Now, the implications of this, and this is what I was writing about in the Australian
Hmm.
and other publications. The reaction to it is a massive reduction in output and therefore in GDP and in income rates and various other things. And the governments, in my view, have played some good roles in this, insofar as trying to shore up the health services, maybe doing things they can to prevent businesses collapsing too rapidly. But they're also doing the sorts of things that we've seen in the past with recessions, where they've just thrown a lot of money at it to try to stimulate demand. To me, this is not a good thing to do. This is a bad thing. It is a total waste of money, and it's being exacerbated in this case by the Reserve Bank going in the stock exchange and buying up shares, etc., about buying up assets to boost the share market price. To me, these sorts of things, A, don't work, and B, just shore up some costs for the future, which we're still paying for the red and the swans kind of boost that occurred with the GFC back in 2008, and we'll
Mm.
be paying for these for a lot longer.
Mm-hmm.
So there are things the government's got to do in terms of trying to keep people safer. Obviously, preventing too much travel from risky places, and trying to see what it can do to stop exacerbating the problem by impairing the supply potential. But we seem to have a view now that governments are all basically all encompassing in terms of their ability to do things. Well, they're not. Governments are just us writ large. They can't do much more than we can do, and can do a lot of damage. And that's my nightmare, is that we will make this worse
Yeah.
by
Mm-hmm.
undue reliance on government.
Yeah, no, I think that's a valid point. Undue rely on government. I see it as, if anything, what they're doing is they're exacerbating it, because I note that they're already moving in to protect airlines, and only selective airlines. They're prepared to protect Qantas, okay, Australian company, Virgin, excuse me, and then they're prepared to let Rex airlines just slip through the cracks and just go and sink into oblivion. I find that reprehensible, that they'd actually use taxpayer money to do such a thing to an Australian company. So they're selective in who they're helping, and I don't agree with that at all. Now, we
Mm.
talked about Murray-Darling Basin. We talked about water security. Several months ago, I warned about food security on the basis that we need to protect our water supply, our energy supply, to ensure our food supply. And right now, we're watching our food supply vaporize in the supermarkets. And instead of responding by getting more people into the, if you like, food manufacturing or food production areas to make sure the shelves stay full, what they're doing is saying they're going to let it shorten again. To me, this is the very reverse of what should be done. If people are so concerned that they don't trust government, they don't trust food supplies, then to me that's an indication of incompetence in this area, in areas that they shouldn't actually be involved in. They should have ensured our water supply, they should have ensured our power supply, and then perhaps the industry could just wind up and say, well, okay, because I went for a drive a couple of weeks back and I saw stored grain in the silos all over the place, stored grain. So there's no reason why that grain couldn't be processed, turned into flour, and fill these supermarket shelves, or turned into bread. There's this lack of confidence, to me, exacerbated by toilet paper. Your
I couldn't
thoughts,
agree
Alan?
more. I could not
Yeah.
agree more. I mean, the government has paralysed the most important agricultural province we had, the Darling and Murray,
Hmm.
by taking 20% of the water away from this. Talking about taking more away from the farmers. Take 20% of the water from the farmers, you're going to reduce the agricultural production by 20% or something close to it. And
Yeah.
that's what we've done. We talk about shooting yourself in the foot. This is a disgraceful situation we have. And
Hmm.
indeed, the present deleterious effects with the virus gives us just an opportunity to actually reverse some of these appalling regulatory decisions we've taken in the past, to
Hmm.
restore that water back to the
Yeah.
farmer, to sell it back. Whatever we do, we get that water back so it can be used productively again.
Hmm. Hmm.
And let's forget, let's get back to the reality that we're
Hmm.
not a country with unlimited resources that can just throw them away whenever we want to.
Hmm.
We are a country with scarce resources. We're a rich country, but we have scarce resources.
Hmm.
And the fact is that the water in those rivers systems is used to produce the food and fiber which feeds us and clothes us all, and much of the and many other areas in the rest of the world. So it is our responsibility to immediately get rid of those regulatory restraints and to allow the water to flow.
Yeah, that's right. To me, what we need, sorry, what we need is we need we need smaller government. We need smaller government, less interference, but we also need to make sure that we have a guaranteed supply. To me, when I talk to people, I say there's three facets to water. One is that there's sufficient. One is that it is reliable or sustainable, and the third is that it is affordable. And if the government can't provide sufficient, sustainable, affordable water, then get out of the road and get a government who can. Because to
Yeah,
me, that's the case that we've got, and they're not doing it. All they're doing is throwing us in the deep end and causing greater and greater chaos. They're not actually answering the problem in the regard to, and I'm just going to take a left or right hand turn here, Alan. I want to actually talk about debt. I want to talk about the consequences of carrying debt within industry, within homes, within families, within government, and the consequence of the economy stalling at this point. Now, Corey Bernardi has just sent out his newsletter, and he's talking about the bond market and the fact that it's going to lunch itself. This debt capitulation is going to be so great that the ramifications 1929 at least are going to be mirrored again. Your thoughts on that, Alan?
well, I think that yeah, we faced a major problem with debt. I quoted various people looking at the levels of debt under President Reagan,
Hmm.
where the debt level I think in the US was about 30%. It's now over 100%, and other economies are the same. So we're much more vulnerable as a result of this accumulation of debt that we've had, and the accumulation, as Corey Bernardi, I think, as you just said, that seems to have gotten easier because interest rates have gone from double digits down to 1 or 2% or 1%
Hmm.
even now. And
Hmm.
it seems, oh, we can carry the debt. But these are unrealistic levels. Once the debt goes back to something more realistic, and you've got to look in longer term interest rates for centuries were 3 or 4 or 5%. And you would expect them to go back to that. There's nothing really changed in terms of the ability of people to borrow and to save, etc. So
Hmm.
you would expect them to go that. So basically, levels of debt will become very much less affordable into the future, and we'll be eating into our capacity to feed and clothe and holiday ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. I see the debt as actually like a dominoes. If you've ever seen those domino things where they push one over and the rest keep going. A
Mm-hmm.
small company who has a cash turnover, and all of a sudden that cash turnover cuts back, and then it says, well, I can't pay the rent, I can't do this, I can't do that, and then the parent of the provider of the resource that they're paying rent, receiving the rent, they start suffering, and then they fall over. And of course, it compounds. There it is. It's just ongoing, 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 and
Exactly.
to the point where there is a complete collapse. And of course, the levels of debt are unsustainable. Now, the government's moving in to protect the airline industry, but they're doing nothing about the millions of Australians who have home debt, the millions of small businesses who are carrying business loans. This whole thing, they're sending them home. And they're saying, okay, shut down restaurants. Well, that means the restaurants suffer. Shut down small business. That means that all these things are a compounding effect. And the thing is that okay, we haven't had the mortality rate. We're not seeing the mortality rate here. India's certainly not seeing it. And so, on that basis, you're looking at it and you're thinking, we are in such a precarious position with debt. This is a position that should never been allowed to have occurred. And again, as government policy through the Reserve Bank, they've allowed it to occur. They haven't done anything about debt alleviation or debt minimisation. They haven't done anything about a sinking fund or nothing about the potential of actually sourcing our own new credits that may even be debt free, which is not unprecedented. The story of the Commonwealth Bank shows that new credits, debt free credits, can be issued to actually reduce total debt. And our levels of debt, of course, are going right through the roof. Your thoughts, Alan?
Well, I'm not really sure how easy it is to simply increase or invent a new debt formula. Certainly, it's true that we're in a precarious position, that the debt levels have been ridden up. It's also true what you're saying is that the government's taken some quite selective steps. Um, the facts of the matter is that the airline businesses all around the world will go bankrupt.
Hmm.
Uh, it's almost impossible that that can't be the case. Uh, and that means that doesn't mean it's the end of air travel. It just means that those companies will go bankrupt and they're replaced as the economy recovers from coronavirus by other shareholders. They are the most vulnerable. You can't reduce the number of flights by 80 or 85%, which is the case with Qantas, and not see a catastrophe for the shareholders. That's bad. It's terrible. But as you say, what can the government do here? The same situation or a similar situation is going to be found with the clubs and the pubs and
Hmm.
various other accommodation industries,
Hmm.
which are also going to see marked reductions in their custom.
Hmm.
Uh, Many will go bankrupt. Um, the government is not all encompassing. It doesn't. When you say the government, well, when people say the government should support this industry or that industry, well, the secret is the government hasn't got any money to support that. The government doesn't have any money at all. All it has is our money. So what people are saying is that we should be compelled to support this industry and that industry and another industry uh, through the vehicle of the government. But there are limitations to what can happen here.
Hmm.
What if you start by saying, well, we should protect Qantas and Virgin, then we start saying, well, what about various other travel agencies? What about hotels?
Hmm.
What I mean, one of the features, if the coronavirus does take off strongly in Australia, is that hotels will be converted to hospitals. At least it's real estate, so that will take place. But there are very many other facilities which are going to face reduced custom. Almost all shops, for example, or
Hmm.
motor vehicle agencies and various things like that, are all going to face reduced custom. The government cannot support them all, nor should it. It
Hmm.
shouldn't try to. It can. You can always support a selective industry when that industry is facing a unique problem. But when all industries are facing the problem, you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, no, I agree, Alan. I would expect that that like a domino effect, that industries would collapse under this, and of course the bond market will collapse. The share market already has, and the Australian dollar is just softening so much against the American, and yet the American economy is no better than ours. Now
No.
the now I guess, and I guess I can't, and I don't think we need to try and answer it here because to me the debt is irredeemable, and it's a consequence of the existing financial system. We have different points of view on that, and that's cool. I'm good with that. Um, the next point I want to talk about is self-reliance in industry, Alan. Now, we've handed our industry over to third world countries, or it's chosen to go where there's cheaper labour. And now what we're looking at is we're looking at a supply chain that is collapsing in front of us for one reason or another. I noted that Amazon is prepared to put on another 100,000 people because it will actually, if you like, soak up this vacuum in the supply chain by working from producers to consumers as they being the middleman. It's an interesting time where if you like, the giants of industry are prepared to swallow up everything else in their wake. Your thoughts, Alan?
Well, if Amazon is performing a useful service there, that's great.
Hmm.
Uh, and if it just swallow the minnows, well, and that's too bad for the minnows. I don't have a problem with that, but I do think that it's the points you're making about the fact that we've allowed our industry to migrate to China or elsewhere, um, and the reason behind this is very squarely the sorts of industrial relations mechanisms we have in place here, which prevents managers from managing, and has resulted in, for example, the closure of the motor vehicle industry, which basically was closed by a judge in the end, saying no, it doesn't matter what the workers say, whether they want to have a more flexible working arrangement. They may not have it. They cannot have it. We have to have this arrangement which is in place. And so Toyota says, well, we can't make any money. We have to leave here. And that is the same story written large in an awful lot of places. we've created a situation where we've got all these awards and all these inflexibilities in terms of the working arrangements we have, all of which add to costs and which have made us less competitive and have led to manufacturing, anything which is footloose, manufacturing in particular, to depart this country.
Yeah, yeah, we've watched our industry melt in front of us. I know because I've seen two car manufacturers leave Adelaide, Mitsubishi, or was originally Chrysler, then to Mitsubishi, and then of course Holden's has now left. I was
Mm-hmm.
born in Geelong, so I think it's Broadmeadows, is it? The Fords,
Forwards,
Fords, and so we're looking at all of these things deconstructed. I mentioned also, of course, under was it North-South dialogue, we lost our shipbuilding here in South Australia under Fraser, and then of course you've looked at the steel manufacturing at Whyalla, and of course the power generation that was up there to marry into it. So it is quite frustrating watching this deconstruction because it's to me it's been a long-term policy, not just short-term. I don't see it as a if you like viability argument in the sense that okay, union awards, all that sort of stuff. To me, robotics is taking over where labour was. And robotics, it gets to the point where if you were paying the very few workforce a good wage, but you had a lot of automation involved, there'd be so little in it. If you like, the justification for government to me is a very important part in this, and that is why do we come together? Why do we actually have a government? What is its purpose? Surely it is to increase the to receive the increment of association so that communities can actually benefit from coming together and achieve the results they desire. Government, to me, one of control, one of decisions, one of laws, is a wrong footing, if you like. I know this is another change of direction, but to me, it's the philosophy of what purpose, what reason behind government in the first place. Your thoughts, Alan?
well, I'd see the point of government as being rather less positive than that. It's basically, I'd see it as basically a means of holding the ring, maintaining the law,
Mm-hmm.
uh, allowing people to get on with their lives.
Mm-hmm.
I see whenever we look to government for leadership on something, we see disaster.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, and almost almost nobody has any confidence in government. I mean, indeed, in the latest coronavirus thing, the government said, "Look, don't panic, don't go buying toilet paper. We've got plenty of it." Well, are you kidding? Everybody got jumped in their car and said, "Well, the government's saying that there's obviously going to be a shortage." I mean, the trust in government is quite cynical, I think, in
Yeah.
the West, and appropriately so, because government usually gets it wrong, as we've seen with the way that they're treating the virus at the present time. So I don't really have that confidence which you expressed, and I know you don't always hold, but that confidence in government as being the good guys. I'd see them as basically their role has to be much more limited, and wherever whenever what have we've talked about here in terms of the last few months, when we were talking about water or whether we're talking about the reaction to the virus or various other things, we can almost always see government doing the wrong thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think
Mm-hmm.
the smallest role for government, the smaller the role for government, the better we will be as a community in
Mm-hmm.
terms of ability to intermix with each other and arrange things to our mutual advantages, etc. Then I think that we're better off with smaller government.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Alan, and I do seriously agree with you. To me, that we talk about Murray-Darling, the purpose of government is to facilitate its sufficiency so that there is water security, not
Yeah.
water shortage. And that means that if there is, say, there is a strong green push, okay, there's a strong green push. They want environmental flows. Well, there's no reason why we can't redirect a couple more rivers down into the Murray-Darling so that those flows are achieved. You can find an environmental solution there that we achieve, and we do flush the river and we reduce the incidence of blue-green algae or fish loss or whatever it is, or wetlands, all those sorts of things. But to turn around and limit it, to turn around and actually limit or shorten the availability of water, to me was a destructive policy, and I see that as where the dickens did you get that from, Malcolm Turnbull? Where did you get that from? Who gave you that idea in your head that you should shorten the supply of water? Conservative government under Howard. I mean, come on. what's going on here, that they actually shorten the supply. They do the very opposite of what a conservative government should do, and that is to provide the environment where the growers can grow, where they can actually provide sufficiency and that water is affordable. The very opposite. And to me, that is writ large. If you use the descriptor, they may have control of the ring, but it's writ large that their policies are doing the very opposite of what they should. Your thoughts?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, and you mentioned, I mean, Howard was, probably one of the better prime ministers we've had, and yet, as you say, he initiated this appalling situation on the water,
Hmm.
initiated the reduction of water use for farmers. In fact, he also initiated the demise of the electricity industry by bringing in place the renewable requirements, which have led to the catastrophic closure of reliable uh, coal-based generators.
Hmm.
Now, that Howard. I mean, I firmly believe that Howard was one of the better prime ministers we've had. If you compare him with Rudd and Gillard and
Hmm.
Turnbull, there is no comparison. So that comes back to my point: is that you've got to minimise the role of government because even the good ones are bad.
Hmm.
Uh, Certainly,
Mm.
we have to prevent them from taking these forward steps to do things, because they will do things on the basis of populism, and
Mm.
populism at the moment, or has been, green activism is saying that the water is becoming putrefied, or it's poisoning this, or resulting in loss of trees and things. Normally, all these things are lies or gross amplifications of of truth.
Hmm.
Uh, but nonetheless, governments are sucker for them.
Hmm.
Uh, when even now with the virus, I mean, we're finding agencies, Rascano, for example, who's very much involved in the renewable industry as well as a zealot there, saying, "Oh well, this is a great opportunity for us to get rid of the rest of these old power stations and put in renewable power." And that same thought is being echoed by the International Energy Agency in Paris, which is part of the OECD,
Mm.
who are also saying the same sort of thing. We ought to
Yeah.
now go to zero emissions by 2050.
Hmm.
Well, this is madness. So we basically we've got a plague on our mind. We're going to face a massive reduction in industry output, and these people are calling for things which make it even worse.
Yeah, that's right. I noted that the on some news sources I've gone to today, they're actually talking about keeping things shut down. Now that we're shutting industry down, is to leave it down and to put us in place where we almost go to ration cards. Now, I noted that there was a push to reduce the amount of cash to 10,000 or less, and that also they were doing trials and tests in regard to a cashless society. And a third thing was the was carbon credits, was energy, was actually to allocate an energy score in your cashless society, so that when you bought food, it was a certain amount of energy went in to produce it. When you paid for electricity or fuel or whatever, and so this to me was all part of the, if you like, the cashless society and the carbon credits. To me, it's a backdoor way of doing the same thing. Your thoughts on those, Alan?
I think the two different things. The cashless society is one of a lot of people are opposed to the $10,000 limit on libertarian grounds. How
Hmm.
can you do that? And I can see some bit of that. But on the other hand, we are moving towards a cashless society. If anybody who owns a pub, for example, would find that more or less that there's hardly any cash going across the tills anymore. Everyone's paying by card, and that's the case with a lot of industries and supermarkets, etc. As far as creating a carbon credit for everybody, and that smacks of the Big Brother imposition on society. That's an appalling process, which the EU is pressing very hard
Yeah.
with, and you've really got to hope that falls by the water. There are some encouraging things coming out of the EU at the present times. Some of the states like Poland and Czech Republic are saying, "Listen, all this green stuff, we've got to stop that
Hmm.
right now." But there are the patriarchs and matriarchs in Brussels are basically pushing ahead with it,
Mm.
and in doing so, trying to impose it on the rest of the world as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to just place my thoughts on the EU, Alan, and that is that the bureaucracy actually runs the EU. The Parliament itself doesn't pass laws, but rather it comes from the bureaucracy. It comes from the commissars, and to me, this is while Poland and Czech or whoever are making noises about it, they actually won't ever get to vote on it. The only way that they're going to change anything is by leaving the EU, and that's as you see, as we've just recently seen with Britain is a long and protracted affair. And I personally don't believe that Britain is actually out of the EU as such. I think this period of negotiation that they're going to go to in the future is actually going to lock them even tighter into the EU. I might be misreading it, but that's my thoughts. Alan, summary and closing comments, please.
Well, I think we're facing relatively dangerous times. Uh, the coronavirus will pass. There will be a lot of people, certainly millions, who die as a result of it. It'll be the older sort of group, which I guess we're both in some form or other, who will face it worse. Um, but
Mm,
things it will pass, and it's a disease which will, in 10 years' time, be a background disease, which will be a killer disease, just like fluids, and society will have moved on. But in combating this disease, we can do a lot of damage, or governments can do a lot of damage to society, to the economy, a lot more damage than people are themselves doing by their preventative and actions, understandable preventative actions. And really, it's for government to step back and not try to assume for itself an almighty, all-knowing answer to all of these things, because it doesn't know the answers. And when it starts trying to impose its own views, it will exacerbate situations.
yeah, no, very, very, very true, Alan. That the to me, this is about individual. This is about communities and building up your own network. As far as the virus management goes, how do you treat the virus that comes around every year? The flus, the summer flus, the winter flus, all that sort of stuff. I'm just going to do a web page run, Alan, and then I'll close. So this is Alan's website, Regulation Economics, and you can see there that his coronavirus stimulus package is there. And of course, this is the ALOR library, of which we're keeping up to date. We've actually put gardening and food production booklets up there for people to consider, so that okay, if the government is doing what it's doing and we're suffering what we're suffering, then perhaps we need to actually help ourselves as well. I know that when I trained with the Metropolitan Fire Service, they would actually they would actually describe people who had to save themselves because there was no one there to save them. They had to save themselves. And in my view, what's going on, this is what it's about. We have to actually look to short term, yes, you may need food supplies from the supermarket. Mid term, you need your grains. But long term, you need to grow your own food. You need to actually set up a secure base with the community around you. We're beekeepers, so we've got a couple of hives, so we've got a supply of honey. And what you can do, you must do. Alan, thank you so much for today.
Thanks, Alice.
No
Good to
worries.
chat.
Pleased to have you.